Isham El Garouge is not the fastest man to run a mile. Well, okay, he's without a doubt the fastest man to run an official mile, but what if we stretch that question out to who is the fastest man to run a mile in any setting? A lot of you watching this might think it's a certain viral video on YouTube you came across, but you'd be surprised what the actual answer is. Let's start off with the race that you might be familiar with, which is the Queen Street Golden Mile. The Queen Street Golden Mile dates back to 1972. It took place in Auckland, New Zealand, where you would sprint straight down a fairly steep hill, which in this case is a good portion of Queen Street, a street I actually lived right next to briefly a couple years ago. The top of this hill here starts off with a pretty drastic drop, but it does eventually level out with another dip near the end. The winner of the very first race was New Zealand 1500 meter champion Tony Polhill, who finished with a time of 3:47.6, which beat Jim Ryan's record at the time by just shy of 4 seconds. A decade went by, and the race was eventually revived with American record holder Steve Scott stepping up to the line. He would destroy the previous record by over 16 seconds with a time of 3:31.25, and with this performance alone, people were now curious what would happen if you put even more world-class milers in one single race. In 1983, the Queen Street Golden Mile came back as part of a race series instead called the Muhlenberg Mile Series. They not only brought back Steve Scott, but then invited Irish mile record holder Ray Flynn, another 3:49 miler Mike Bois, and a few more athletes who were well within contention for such a showdown. The 400-meter split isn't available in the video, but an article from someone who ran the race back then said they were through the quarter in a staggering 52 seconds and the half at around 1:41 or 1:42, which, depending on how specific, could have beaten the 800-meter world record at this time. Coming down the last quarter, it's no question Bois is going to be the winner, but his shockingly fast time of 3:28.36 was something no one saw coming, along with two other men breaking the 3:30 barrier. Christine Hughes almost became the first ever woman to run a sub 4 mile, running 4:02.93, while Britt McRoberts took second with 4:03.2. This mile is what a majority of people currently know as the fastest mile ever run. But what if I told you there was someone not just slightly faster, but multiple seconds ahead of these elite athletes? This is where the Meltham Maniac Mile comes in. The Meltham Maniac Mile is another point-to-point downhill mile race that resides in the UK. It also has the Murder Mile, which is just the uphill version, and the Murder Maniac Mile, which has you go up and down in the same race. The downhill version of this hill has an average grade of negative 8.6%, which, if you're not too familiar with grades, is pretty damn steep. Take this Strava activity from the fastest person to do it on this app. His average pace became over 30 seconds slower with the grade adjusted pace function, meaning that in a flat or track setting, he would have realistically run around a 4:26 mile. Given how obscenely steep this downhill race is, any solid miler could crush a fast time here, and that became obvious with one of its first renditions. On the Meltham Town Council's official website, sources cite results from 1985 that show a slew of sub 4 milers, some well in the 3:30s and a good chunk in the 3:40s. The year after, someone would actually break Mike Bois' downhill mile record, as Dave Ottaway would run an official time of 3:27, making this the new fastest mile on record by any means possible. This record would stand for a few years until the most unexpected person shattered this time by over almost 4 seconds. Craig Wheeler, an extremely talented high school runner, would clock in a time of 3:24.2 at the Maniac Mile, with an 8-second lead over the second place finisher. It was also documented that his effort apparently didn't look that labored, and that he really just seemed to gain more and more confidence as time went on. This race is the fastest mile on record as far as I can find, but just in case anyone is skeptical, is this course properly measured, and why might we not see a time like this ever again? To address the first question, yes, this course is properly measured and was a very active race in the 80s and 90s, with subtle returns today. To address the second question, well, it absolutely can happen, but it's going to be pretty hard to convince elite athletes nowadays to decimate their quads for a gimmicky record. I'd imagine if the prize pool was big enough and it wasn't during an important part of their season, it would be possible to have sub 350 milers take a crack at the Maniac Mile or something similar. But until then, there's just simply no desire for it. The Queen Street one is fine, but it's just simply nowhere near as steep as the one in Meltham, especially if athletes want to have a safer bet at beating the record. Lastly, not to discredit anyone, but if a 17-year-old can run 3:24, I don't see why, comparatively speaking, elite athletes can run under 3:20, and perhaps a woman can break the 4-minute barrier for the first time. On the other hand, Craig Wheeler might have just been been an anomaly at running downhill, and his time can be much more difficult to beat than we think. We will truly never know unless we see someone at the very least come close to Wheeler's 3:24. For now, Mike Bois's time is the fastest video documented mile on record, but in terms of raw results at a properly measured mile course, it's Craig Wheeler's legacy that should be revered as the fastest person ever to run a mile. I'd be interested to hear you guys' thoughts on this. Will someone attempt to beat Wheeler's record in the future? And can a woman break the 4-minute barrier on top of that? Thank you to all my patrons for supporting the channel, and if you want to see more track and field content like this, come on over and become a patron, drop a sub, and peep the Instagram too. I'll see you all in whatever video I upload next, and take care.